think that's the demand.
Well, let's hop into Philosophy Club then. Let's do it. We're back at it with Garrett Dailey, Ion Enterprises, our Chief Philosophy Officer, and Tabalo from the Yeatum community, our Chief Yeater, as well as me, Sam Hebda, your host and Chief Community Officer at Triba. We are between the three of us. We've been doing this for we're probably some of the longest standing Philosophy Club members. Garrett's been running these for a long
For
time,
Aeon. For Aeon.
for aeons and aeons, eons and aeons and ions. Garrett, how you doing today, man? Thanks for joining us.
Good. All good in the hood.
We also want to just give a special shout out to all our gold subs. Clarifications, Garrett Dailey, Joel Thinks, Martin from Zero Precedent, Matthew from Code Lifeline, Michelangelo, and also known as Ardito, Sagith from Remotely Placed, Samantha from BUTV, Tabalo from Yeatum, and Victor Valentino from Valentine Media. Thank you guys so much for your support, and we look forward to continuing to grow this community as we do more and more live events and features with some really awesome people coming up, including Meta Intro. We're doing a Web3 speed dating with them, which is really awesome. And we also have a six-figure Shopify expert coming in who's helped, several different Shopify stores grow to six figures. She's going to be showing the basic steps to build and launch a Shopify store. So also really exciting. So let's jump into it. If you guys want to join us, go to discord.gg/triba and hop in co-working. You can ask your questions or participate in the live discussion. We love to hear from you. Otherwise, leave us a follow and a like, and we will answer any comments you post on social media. We got a great team. Also, if you go to Ion Enterprises, you can see all Garrett's socials linked up there and find him on LinkedIn and stuff. He writes some really great content.
And I have scheduled out a month of it, so you'll see some reposts Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9 and 10.
All right.
That could be a good subject, Garrett, is like timeless content, like content that...
Evergreen is the industry term.
Oh.
Yes, evergreen.
No, that's not really a philosophy topic. We can talk about like timeless concepts. Sure, why not?
Acceptance?
No. So, all right. So one of my clients is a company called Leaders Atlas, and Leaders Atlas does basically leadership and team building consulting for largely remote teams, right? One of the concepts they have that I'm currently building an onboarding system for them that like onboards everybody into the company philosophy. And so they have one of the ideas in there is that technology changes, but human nature doesn't, which I think is really salient, right? So one of the things I thought about for a while is like, we only invented psychology as like a field of study in the last 100, maybe 125 years. Certainly not like formally more than 150 years old, right? And that's a weird thing to think about because like it's not like nobody thought about psychology before 150 years ago at all, right? Mm-hmm. You just wouldn't have had it in the form of...
We got some echo. Can mods handle that? Get a mute in here. All right, thanks. Continue.
Yeah, so the so it's interesting because you think about like 48 Laws of Power or something, which is like obviously it's a very modern book. It's a book that was written in the last 20 years, I would say. Yeah, so right around there, early 2000s. And people act like all these things are new, and they're not, right? I mean, if you're at least comparing against 48 Laws of Power, you could go as far back as The Prince, which is Machiavelli, and I want to say that's like 1600. When's Machiavelli? 1400?
I'll look it up. I think it's 1600s. Because I'm pretty sure that's like when... I think that's
1500s. Yeah. 14 and 15. Yeah, okay, so...
I can't count.
Yeah. So that's the first book where somebody like really we just got gained and lost a ton of people really fast. It's like the first book where somebody tried to like explain the rules of power and stuff, and I think a lot of that stuff just wasn't like written down, right? Now, going over to like China has a lot of this stuff written down in the form of like the Tao or the I Ching, which I have a copy of somewhere here. I actually have a copy of both. I just don't. My shelf is really disorganized right now. But there's a lot of advice. It's interesting, like the I Ching, the way it's put together. So for those of you who aren't familiar, there's it's called the Book of Changes, and it is very, very weird. You could loosely say that it's like the Chinese equivalent to tarot, and that would be like maybe 50% correct, right? But so basically, this book has 64 hexagrams in it. Let me see if I can find. There's a picture of a hexagram in here with what that means. So basically, there's these designs which are called hexagrams, which are like 6 horizontal lines that are stacked on top of each other, like vertically, right? And a line can either be like solid or broken, meaning it would be like either a straight through line or a line with a gap in the middle, right? And as you stack these on top of each other, you get different hexagrams, right? Which have 2 trigrams in them. The trigrams are the basic elements, right? So there's, I want to say 6 or 8 trigrams. Yeah, I think there's 8 trigrams, which forms a total of 64 hexagrams. Each one of those symbols represents a concept. So, for example, if you have water over fire, meaning the trigram for water over the trigram for fire, then that represents after completion for some reason. So it's like unclear exactly. I don't know. It's quite a long book. But so anyway, they built this kind of conceptual system out, and that each of these things represents a different kind of like universal human experience, right? This is very similar to how tarot works. And for anyone who immediately hears tarot and says, "Oh no, it's witchcraft or something," it's like, that's not how it works. It does not predict the future. Nobody knows how to do that. What I think when these things were created, like tarot or the I Ching or other like divinatory systems that came out before the last 200, 300 years, the people who created them understood human psychology very, very well. And so we look at psychology nowadays as something where it's like, hey, we're going to perform a study and we're going to learn what happens if we shock Tabalo at 200 volts, right? But back in the day, it was a lot more holistic. And so you have this idea of like, with Carl Jung, you have the archetypes, and that kind of refers to a similar concept as these, where there are universal human experiences and universal human personas, right? Carl Jung argued that there is a thing called the collective unconscious that everyone has, that is shared, right? Where in the collective unconscious, you have these things like the hero or the dragon or the evil queen or the wise old woman, right? The child, the father, the tyrant. All of these are archetypal figures. Everyone immediately knows what I'm talking about when I say those things, because we all have that shared language around it, right? And so when you're looking at psychology, when you're looking at these systems, the people who wrote them, the reason why they're useful and not terrible, like or the reason why they stuck around is not because they suck, but there are, in the I Ching, which is very interesting. And you could let me see if I can find an online I Ching thing so you can try it out and see what it's talking about. But yeah, here you go. So this is a really, really shitty website. So apologies.
What just happened?
The wrong button.
Okay.
Every time I do that. Okay, so I just shared that in the co-working chat. You can try it out, look into it. But the point of this is not for you to think that this is going to tell you about like the future or something. Obviously, the point of this is for me to illustrate a point, and that point is that archetypal archetypal concepts are universal, right? In the nature of the human experience is such that there are certain things that are always going to happen. You're always going to have, at least conceptually, parents. Like your parents could both be dead by the time that you're born, but theoretically you have them, and there's an archetypal idea of like the absent father or the absent mother, right? Those are also human universals, or hopefully less universal than present fathers and mothers, right? But and so when you look at like human society as this kind of archetypal thing, there are universal stories. And this is the reason that something like the monomyth or the hero's journey works at all, because our brain has receptors that are primed for this kind of data and this kind of order, right? If you had a story where you have, someone who's neither a hero nor a villain, who doesn't do anything, and there's no antagonist, and there's some people that pop up in the story that don't have any clearly defined roles. They just say something irrelevant to the plot, and they disappear, and you don't know why they were there, and you don't know why they left, right? You don't really have a story at all. Doesn't make any sense. There is a universal format, that works when we put it in this order, and that underlies this kind of point that there is a universal kind of structure to the human experience. And this is what psychology tries to get at a part of, right? Psychology tries to understand from a scientific, like empirical perspective, like why does it work the way that it does? How does it work? But why it's like this rather than why it works, those are two kind of different things. And so I guess the broad topic of what we're discussing today is like things that are true about human nature are basically always true across time, which is why this book that's at least 1,000, if not several thousand years old, can still give you good advice about your life, because the person who wrote it understood human nature, they understood archetypal human situations, and were able to communicate that in a way that's vague enough that it applies to everyone, right? This is very similar to what I did with the 4 games deck, which is somewhere in the family of things like the I Ching or tarot. But basically, I have it broken down where you have a combination of experiences and archetypes that are universal to everybody. So, for example, craftsmanship, just because I'm pulling them at random, right? At some point in your life, you're probably going to make something, whether you're making a burger at McDonald's or designing an app or building a chair or a house or something, right? So if everyone's going to probably make something at some point, there are very few people in the world that don't make anything. You're going to make kids too, right? Like everybody's going to make something. You might make a mess. Craftsmanship is something everyone's going to experience, and maybe that's a little bit more in the long term kind of example. But so decay, another one in there that like everyone's going to experience decay at some point. Like your car is going to break down, body's going to fall, everything fades, and so on. So when you can lean on these kind of universal human experiences, whatever you do applies to everyone all the time. It doesn't apply to everyone at all times, all the time, but everything will apply to someone at least some of the time, right? You're not always experiencing decay. You're not always experiencing craftsmanship, but on a long enough timeline, the span of a life, you're going to experience all of these things, right? There's a time to sow, a time to reap, all that good stuff. So the takeaway, the first takeaway is mostly that if something was true in the past, it's still true now, with the exception of things that are like really temporal, like maybe you aren't going to have a dowry, because we don't do that anymore, really.
So
go ahead.
Yeah, I want to add like the scale, like because the thing about these like principles, they have to operate at all scales, right, or magnitudes.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing with science, like for example, when we say human nature is constant. Well, does that basically omit like evolution? Like, does that say evolution's not a thing, or
So no, and this is where yeah, I understand what you're asking. So Look, Peterson likes to use the example of lobsters, right? Lobsters have a fully functioning serotonin system. So if a lobster loses a lobster fight, they become physically smaller and sad. And if they win, they get bigger and more aggressive, right? Um, so in the sense that the serotonin system is something that we have innately something similar to that with lobsters. So it's a universal, right? However, what you're kind of describing is that there are emergent properties at higher levels of organization, right? So, for example, would somebody in 500 AD understand the dynamics of like international trade? No, no, they would not. It wasn't a thing that happened yet. There's a concept that
Well, it depends how far back you go, right? Like that's kind of the thing.
What I'm saying is, would somebody, would anyone understand? Like, I'll be more specific to like this is kind of a asinine way to make this point, but like, could somebody in the year 500 have the capacity to understand international trade in the way that like Jeff Bezos does? No, not at all. That the level of trade wasn't even there weren't enough people to engage in enough trade for it to work the same way, right?
But
And you can
conceptually, it's the same, right? Like in the human nature side of it,
uh,
right? Like in terms of Rome or the Islamic
conceptually,
Empire, or
like the people who are engaging in the experience are the same, more or less, right? Although you could make arguments about like has IQ increased over time or stuff like that, but I won't get into the weeds there. Um, but the issue with it is more like you basically what I'm trying to get at is there what you would call emergent properties, right? So, for example, there are properties of molecules that emerge out of the combination of individual particles, right? Those particles, you could say that maybe innately the higher level properties are somewhere inside of the smaller things, but they don't appear until you have larger combinations of things, right? So if you put together enough protons and electrons and neutrons, you can get anything out of them. But does an individual proton, neutron, or electron have the properties of the bigger thing? No, not really. They're implicit in kind of a abstract way, but you wouldn't be able to just like look at, let's say you didn't know anything and you're just sitting there looking at a proton, neutron, and electron. You couldn't infer, glass from that because it's so many levels of like emergent properties abstracted out, right? So with human society, that's one of the things. So, but one of the things I've talked about this a lot in here before, and I won't get super hardcore into like the backbone of this, but one of the things I've talked about is metasystem transition, where as you move from smaller to larger systems, in this case, like societies, new things emerge, right? So if you run off of like the assumption that Dunbar's number is the size that a group works at really well, okay, well, the way that you get larger groups to work together when you're breaking Dunbar's number is very different. You can't rely on it just working, right? Which is where things like marketing come in, right, or politics.
so so like it's with the constant and change of like human nature. Um, wouldn't it be wouldn't it be saying that like to some, like what you're saying in the beginning, some universal sense, it's objective no matter the self prescribed subjective, you know, view. Because if you're talking about psychology or sociology or like these meta systems of society, what we're saying is like the system of human nature is the same, either at a collective or individual scale, right?
Okay, but we're talking about different things at these different scales. That's the trick, right? So is we again, there's debate about this, but I would say that I would confidently say like greater than 70-80% like confident that a person today is not fundamentally like physiologically or psychologically that terribly different from a person 1,000, 10,000 years ago. However, the stuff that is placed into the mental bucket of that person is quite different, right? And the experience of living in the world that they are engaging in today is quite different as well. The compute I don't like doing consciousness computer metaphors, but I'll do one here and don't run with it.
Uh-oh.
The just it's always it's a dangerous slippery slope, but
Singularity.
the computer is the same. The software the software is the same. The inputs and outputs are different, and the volume of inputs and outputs is quite different as well, right? Like it's quite a bit more. So the trick is that one if you had one a series of groups, so let's say one person, 5 people, 50 people, 150 people, 10,000 people, 100,000 people, 10 million people, 10 billion people, right?
Infinity.
Those groups have different dynamics at different scales. So there are emergent properties of groups, right? If you have just one person, we could look at psychology in a vacuum, which doesn't exist, right? Like, the person always exists in some kind of context. So, but the average person in a vacuum is going to have, at least one portion of the full spectrum of human psychology, right? And that full spectrum includes mental disorders. That full spectrum includes geniuses and the mentally handicapped. It includes people with different personality types, right? It's any number of things. Any person is always going to be a slice of that, and it varies from person to person. But if you take all living people, that full spectrum is at least almost completely encompassed. However, you can imagine, like, let's pretend that nobody has been as good at music since Beethoven. So even if you took all living people, maybe there's somebody that just still doesn't fill the void that Beethoven filled, right? So I'm not going to get into the weeds with it. You could debate that for a long time. But
One point though is like, we always like, I'm with you in the sense of we can rationalize it and we try to like deduce it down to like some sort of elements and properties that make sort of like single hand or two hand sense about it in term just simplicity. But like the thing with science is like everything, all the laws and rules we've established that like are the baseline of how we frame our mental model, they all break down in infinity. All every single one. So it's like
laws
there's this
laws are
kind of
relative
like
to scale, man.
problem to
Like,
that.
no, laws are relative to scale. So there's this idea of
But if you're
versim
talking universal law,
versimilitude verisimilitude, which I will get you the definition of. Verisimilitude is like some things are more true than other things, right? But all truths are approximations of the capital T true, which is always outside of our grasp, right? For example, Newtonian physics was enough for the time that it was around until we started trying to deal with quantum stuff. And it's like, okay, Newtonian physics is true in some cases, and then it's not true. It doesn't appear to be true in the same way for quantum stuff because the scale is different, right? Similarly, right, if the psychology of you and your family is going to be very different from the psychology of you if we dropped you in the middle of Somalia, right, and you have to interact with everybody in Somalia, or like if we dropped you in the middle of like Mongolia, your experience is fundamentally different because you're operating in a different scale. Or if you were talking like to the president or prime minister or whatever of Mongolia, right, um, fundamentally different like systems at work, because then you're looking at people in large groups with different interests in those groups, right? So you have emergent properties in the same way that the political kind of dynamics of Mongolia, maybe you have two factions in Mongolia that are fighting, are just not present in a smaller group unless you pulled a person from either side of that larger group out, and then you had like one person from the left and one person from the right. So there are emergent properties, and people start acting in consistent ways in larger groups. For example, the bystander effect. If you're in New York City and you get shot on the street and there's like 100 people walking past you a minute, the likelihood that people are going to stop and help you is quite low because everybody says, there's a lot of people over here. It's not my job. Also, it's New York. I don't want to get shot, right?
it's, you made me think of like in that segment of like Tom Cruise in The Last Samurai. But that anomalous thing you're talking about when it's like observed as anormal or atypical, like usually that's the signal, right, of like an emergent pattern or the like or some new system rectifying or emerging. That in our like even in the business competitive end, that means to adapt too, right? Like
Yeah, Well, that's the thing. That's why, like, if, again, like, okay, this is probably enough psychology to deal with. Like, what I imagine this book was created for example, was like, I'm an advisor to some kind of king or emperor in like medieval China or ancient China, right? And I can't personally tell them what to do directly because I can't even look at them, right? If you've seen like Hero, that was how where you were only allowed to look at them, the emperor, if they let you, right? Um, and
It's like how
so,
the
which is
Han Dynasty worked with East Alexandria to beat the Qing Dynasty. I think. You ever hear about
what
that?
is
It's
what
like
what is that?
it's when Alexander the Great, like he went the furthest east, but they
What is I don't understand what the relevance is though.
it's just making a real historical example of kind of what you're saying. Like,
Sure. So what I'm getting at though is, okay, let's say you're the court magician or the court advisor to the fucking Han Emperor, right? Um, if you're good at your job, you might survive through a series of emperors or dynasties, right? Maybe they get killed off and they like you. Like Robespierre was like this. He survived through several French ruling systems during a series of French revolutions, right? Because
Littlefinger
he
in
was
Game of
good.
Thrones.
Dead on. Yeah, yeah, same thing. So let's say you're that guy and you're like, hey, I need to be able to give the emperor good advice, but I can't tell him, hey, that's fucking stupid or you're being aggressive or something like that. So I figured what they did is they wrote the 64 trigram explanations and they made them all general good advice that was like, hey, calm down, make a wise decision, don't be crazy, right? And then they could just throw the sticks on the floor because that's how it works. You have broken sticks and unbroken sticks, and you throw the sticks on the floor, and then you get a trigram out of it, right? You can also do it with quarters. If it yeah, heads is unbroken and tails is broken, I think. Um,
But
but
it's
at
like
any rate,
you leave it at odds. Is that like the
but the point is,
thinking?
if you give people it's the same thing as like astrology, right? If you give people universal good advice that's vague and true to everyone, then everyone thinks that they're getting advice just for them. And so that's how these things are designed. It's the same thing with tarot. Like, and tarot especially is kind of like it's
Yeah.
frustrating because the way every card has like 10 interpretations, so they didn't even try to make it like clear. So it's like, oh, it could mean this, it could mean that. It's like, okay, well, it obviously is. You're trying to figure out what it means. It's not, the cards aren't telling you anything, right? But that's the thing. It works. These things work because there are universal human experiences that people can relate to, and if they try hard enough, depending on if it's like the I Ching is a little bit more straightforward, but it's vague in different ways. But it does give you a scenario, or like tarot that gives you 10, and you have to figure out what it means, right? You're able to relate to this universal information because there's something fundamentally true about it, right? If somebody gave you a book and all of the information in it had nothing to do with you, they were like, okay, well, when you when somebody says lembo, you need to say rump. Like, those aren't words that people say, and it would be weird advice that doesn't apply to anyone. So we can look on the spectrum of things, and this is like basically verisimilitude. Verisimilitude. I just learned about that word. Some things are more true than others, right? And this is especially in the realm of the subjective. When we're dealing with objective things, we can say that is a tree, that is not a tree, and be correct in one direction or the other.
Why do we bifurcate like from the get go? Like why are we disconnecting?
The objective and the subjective,
Yeah, why?
because
Yeah.
well, they're fundamentally different, right? They're related and they're inseparable, but they're fundamentally different. So, for example, if somebody says they're mad, can you prove that they're mad?
Well,
No.
a neurologist or they would measure their brain activity
We can
or their
say we can
cortisol or
say
something.
Right. We can say that they're exhibiting similar things to other people that we have tested who said that they're mad and we measured these results from. We can't say that they're mad. We could guess that they're mad, right? We can't prove empirically any subjective emotions at all because they're subjective, right? So they're fundamentally different. It's the same the same thing if your significant other says I'm fine, right? They can say that they're fine. We can probably estimate that the high likelihood
That
is that
means
they
they're
are
not
not fine. That means they're not. Well, that's weird because objectively, you would think it would mean that they are, right? Many a man has been tricked by such words in the past. And probably throughout time. I bet if you went far enough back, you would prove. I bet that's a human universal, right? I think that's just how it works. But so that's where that's a really interesting topic. Is that I think knowledge changes over time a lot, but I think wisdom is almost always true because wisdom is almost always dealing with the subjective nature of things, right? Is there an objective concept of a hero? No. Because does somebody, does the universe have like a monitor that says, okay, you do one more good thing and you're automatically promoted to hero because we have a clear, provable metric for that? Like, no, there isn't. But we know that heroes exist, right? We all know what that means. And it may vary slightly from person to person, but the society has a pretty clear definition of what that is, even though it's not a black and white literal thing, right? It's wisdom, it's subjective. So,
Well, in the West, we derive that. We were talking about the East and the 64 trigrams, but in the West, that's usually comes from religious. So either like Jesus or King Solomon or something, right?
or it
In
could be
terms
the
of
Greek
wisdom and
heroes, it
judgment.
could be Roman heroes. Are you talking about wisdom? Like, what? Define your terms. What are you talking about?
Like I'd say the most widely accepted and recognized symbolic views and ideas of it, right? Like there's like the like
Well,
the like recognized judgment or recognition of the individual professing it, you know.
okay, yeah. So what's the question with regards to that definition?
So like in the West, that's how we attribute it, right? That's usually how we perceive a hero, right? It, it or
Yeah,
it's either that or a Disney movie,
well, yeah, but I would say that
which is
also
a Greek
Disney is
myth.
drawing on universes, right? So yeah, but here's the thing. I would say that it's not the variation, let's say, just between East and West and what constitutes a hero is probably not that different, with the exception of maybe the last 20 years, where I would say a lot of people on social media get called heroes for shit that is not necessarily
Oh
heroic,
yeah.
and that is an outlier. So we can throw that out, but think about like mid 90s, somebody in any country who goes and pulls a kid or a cat out of a burning building, almost almost all cases is going to be considered a hero, except for the person that like lit the house on fire to kill the kid or the cat, right? So most people will agree that is a heroic thing to do. And there are some core traits of this, which is like selflessness and bravery, or courage, willingness to stand up for what's right. um, Similarly, if depending on which side of the political aisle people sit on, some things that some political people would consider very brave would be considered very bad on the other side. But that's again contextual, right? We still
So
have a concept of hero that transcends both sides.
so on that like philosophical universal natural law component, like this is where you get in the land of like Christian law or like Judaic law and like what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
that's how our society's governed for the most part.
yeah.
Like
I
they're
mean,
polar opposites.
we could debate that. Well, so yeah, in the sense that like a Greek hero is going to be killing a hell of a lot more than a Christian hero is, right?
Right.
And frankly, most I would say most definitions of hero for most of the time included a lot more murder than they do today, right? Um, but I think that's like a cultural change, and that doesn't mean that the perception of heroes existing is fundamentally different. We just changed our terms for what constitutes one. But even then, we still, people would still call. I would say depends. Unless you're relatively left, most people would say like Chris Kyle's a hero, in the sense that he's like a war hero. He's a very accomplished sniper, right? Very unfortunately murdered. Uh, we still, or like the during the beginning of the Ukraine thing, it was probably fake, but the ghosts of the one Ace, that plane that didn't exist,
Oh
or
yeah,
made it,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the ghost of whatever the town was called. It was so cool. Oh man, if anyone ever played Ace Combat, this is a divergence here, but or tangent, but if you ever played Ace Combat, that was like straight out of Ace Combat. That was the coolest. I really wish that was true, but I have a strong feeling it was propaganda. But it was very good propaganda because we wanted to believe. Um,
Oh man, don't get me started on all that.
yeah, no, It's at any rate though, the fact that these propaganda pieces work indicates that there's something fundamentally true that they're connecting to, right? Even if the propaganda itself is false, there's that archetypal hero concept that we have in our head is true in a subjective way, right? The the fact that we can talk about heroes at all means we all know what it is and we all share that kind of concept inside of our heads. We can debate who we would call a hero, but we are debating something that is a shared concept, right?
Flip
And
it
so
on
this
its
kind
head,
of
it's like how you'd attribute a terrorist, like a
yeah, well,
villain.
that's a better example because one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, right?
Right.
And I would say that's where like a terrorist is actually not an archetype because uh, you could say a villain is an archetype. You could have a rebel. A rebel is certainly an archetype, or like there's a bunch of different names for the core archetypes, and rebel is also like renegade. Um, you know, any number. There's a different kind of frameworks you could put on it, but a rebel is certainly an archetype. And a rebel could be a hero, a rebel could be a bad person, and that is contextual. But the act of rebellion, right? For example, like the American Revolution, most people would say that that was a noble act of rebellion, unless you're like an English person in the 1700s.
Unless you're the crown, yeah.
Texas sucked. But the on the other hand, you know, most rebellions are probably bad, right? I mean, rebellion is inevitable, but like things that create chaos, most people would say are net bads, right? Necessary net bads, but there's still a lot of times net bads, right? Most people don't actually. This is one of those things. Like we, in a lot of, at least American culture, you know, what's one of the most popular types of movies is the dystopian society where a rebel overturns the bad order. It's very very popular, like Hunger Games or Divergent or Mad Max isn't exactly that, but like kind of there's a little bit of that in Harry Potter. There's certainly that's the whole premise of Star Wars. You know, it's very 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 common archetypal story. In reality, we don't like rebels, right? If you know somebody think about a high school environment, you have somebody that doesn't dress like the other kids and they don't follow the social rules, we ostracize those people, right? Which is kind of paradoxical because we like to pretend that we're all rebels and we're all fighting for the good. But in reality, most people in Nazi Germany were not rebels, right? Most people did not rebel against, like, I don't know, lockdowns or censorship or like any of the horrible things that are going on today. Most people are actually complicit, right? And we tell ourselves these stories and we empathize with them because they're something that calls us to be better. But when we only consume these stories as entertainment, we get the feeling of being this thing without having to do anything about it. And I would say that's where mass media is ultimately very dangerous because you can go watch a superhero movie and not have to be a better person, but you feel like it because that's how watching movies works, right? You get the feelings of engaging with this.
And what the point you're proving on though is like it's really important to understand because it's I remember I read a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and they talked about like the sociology of like new like fresh out of school like lawyers, um and like it's about like wanting to be the same but also wanting to be different at the same time. So like in the context you ask them, like they'll lean one way or the other. So like these lawyers, they would be new into the law firm and everyone would have their nice Beamer or whatever car, so they would feel socially compelled to have that same purchasing behavior, but they would get a different color and they'd feel unique, you know. So it's like it's kind of that like same like you still want to be a part of a larger whole, but you want to be distinct, and the things that make you distinct aren't exactly like a very distinct attribute, you know.
Yeah, well, I think you have the tension between I mean a broad sense individuality and conformity, right? So let's say total nonconformist Nikola Tesla, right? Or like Sid Vicious. I hate Sid Vicious personally because he did a horrible cover of Frank Sinatra and he is a piece of shit for that. But Tesla, Nikola Tesla, who's like not that functional in society and frankly shouldn't be. He's much smarter than everyone and he's right. So everybody else is wrong. Um, but it made him very non-functional, right? You pay a price for pure individuality, right? If you were totally perfectly individual, you'd be like an autistic savant. You wouldn't be able to communicate with people because you have no shared conceptual web, right? um so that's one extreme. The other extreme would be total conformity, which would be like, somebody in 1984 who actually believes the stuff in 1984. Like they see no problem with it like that. They fit in. They have no individual thoughts or self.
It's like I
These,
support the current thing meme, kind of.
yeah, but not that somebody supports it, that they're true believers of exactly what is popular. They have no original thoughts. So we could look at both of these as bad, right? Nikola Tesla is functional enough to be very, very famous and memorable, and probably will be for a long time. Sid Vicious, we could debate that, but you could also look at somebody who's like totally non-functional as like an autistic savant who doesn't have special powers, right? Maybe they only know how to like estimate the cubic volume of an egg by looking at it, and they can't speak English because or whatever appropriate language, right? Because they are non-communicative, right? They're going to have a very bad time because they're not similar enough to other people to function. So a good example of this, we could talk about like 3 levels of fashion, right? If you're at level 1, you don't know how to dress yourself because you don't know how it works, right? So you walk into a business meeting wearing like jeans with a belt that doesn't match your shoes, and like a
prom. It's like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah, that's a good example. Or like dads that have to go to court for something, right? Or like a southern wedding where nobody can afford a tux kind of thing, right?
yeah, it's
Okay,
not
so
sure. Yeah,
you don't know that you need to fit in. You don't fit in. It doesn't look good, and you don't understand the purpose of it at all. You're hurting yourself. So if somebody like that, kids going to job interviews is another example of this, where they like dress like their dad and they have like these big baggy shitty clothes, right? You're non-conforming in a way because you're unaware of this, that hurts you, right? Let's say, okay, now the next thing, typically what you'll do is do exactly what everyone else is doing. So, hey, all the kids are wearing American Eagle, I'm going to wear that, right? All my friends are wearing Hot Topic clothes, I'm going to dress like a emo kid, right? Hey, all the lawyers in my office wear this specific kind of suit in these colors, right? And you notice there are very specific colors. It's black, gray, or navy, right? Um, that's what you wear. More probably navy than anything else. And maybe there's like 5 colors of tie you're allowed to have, and maybe there's certain patterns, and you can go down that road. But there's a higher level of this. Yeah, there's a higher level of this where you understand how to do it and you can use them to your advantage, right? So today's not a great example of this. I'm not really dressed super professionally, but I do love this shirt. But typically, like what I'm trying to do most of the time is dress professionally enough that I fit into the environment that I'm in, and then walk it back like a step. Because if people don't like the fact that I have a bunch of tattoos and I have a long beard and stuff, we're already not going to get along. So I'm pre-selecting things that are going to enable people to get along with me, and all my tattoos are philosophy stuff. So if people ask about them, it's a good conversation starter. It's part of the very convoluted Garrett sales funnel to convince people to talk about philosophy for several hours, which you've all been a part of. Yes, more or less, right? And so that's the thing, is that like we're using fashion as an example, but fashion is communication in that regard. And it's communication of sameness and differentness, right? Differentness is exciting, but it's also a bad thing if you're too different. Sameness is comforting, but it's very boring if you're too much the same. So you need to be able to balance these two things. And so it's interesting because it's like there's there's a Maya, there's an acronym for this, which is most advanced yet acceptable. And you could switch this out for the context that we're speaking in and say most audacious yet acceptable. But the premise is that people don't actually like new things. They like an acceptable thing that's exciting, right? If you say, hey guys, I invented a machine that makes money irrelevant, and it can generate food and lumber and raw materials and shelter for free immediately, people would hate that. Even maybe a person would want it for themselves.
People would hate that. It's like the system in control would hate that. right?
No, people would actually hate that if
Individuals
they
would
thought
hate
of
it.
it enough. Yeah, because hey, I don't have a job anymore, right? Nobody has a job anymore. If you said it pushes a button and immediately gives you exactly what
You
you
don't have
want.
a purpose anymore.
Yeah, and this is a nonsense example, but if you said like, hey, we just invented a teleporting machine that teleports you instantaneously, um, no one would be ready for that because guess what? The airlines go out of business, the car companies go out of business. We don't need roads anymore, right? So cities are now empty husks with no cars in them, which would be a
Well,
good
that's
thing.
what
But
AI is doing, and people like it.
right, but AI is not there enough to be scary for the majority of people yet. It doesn't really do that much that's that interesting. Give us 10 years and it'll be crazier, but
It can
um
do all of our jobs here, probably.
no. I'm confident that it can't, because
Why?
just based off because it doesn't think. It just repeats and regurgitates things that it's been trained on. I'm not getting into the AI debate. I've had this debate like
Isn't that
five
what we
times this
do
week.
as professionals, though? We just
No, uh,
what?
no. I
That's what we do.
for example, there is not enough. Uh, there are not enough like data sources in the world that you could give an AI to make them produce like the ion symbol, right? It took me
Yeah, you
4
could.
years.
It's
No,
triangles and lines and circles.
not in a way that makes sense. No, that's the problem. It doesn't understand the content of things. It can give you the form of thought, but it can't give you the content or the experience of thought, right?
It could make like
So
5,000 of them in different
I've seen
variations.
you can no if you look up I looked at all of them when I like the years ago when I was working on that, right? And there are a bunch of people had actually tried to make a similar kind of symbol, which is like a variety of combinations of the letters alpha and omega or alpha, iota, and omega. And some people got kind of close to that, but you could tell that they didn't make sense in the same way. And this is a little bit like a self-aggrandizing example, which I don't really enjoy,
It's a good
but I can
symbol. I really like it. I mean, I
thank you.
respect your design and that.
Well, but my point is that like it is the way that it is because it's like that for a reason, and AI cannot come up with reasons to do stuff. So you could automatically like generate thousands and thousands of combinations of some basic shapes or whatever, and it just isn't going to be able to make it make sense,
But that's
right?
a subjective value to your creation, right? Like this is like the
Which is
art
the
and the
point.
artist
It
type of
it's
thing.
not going to create subjective value. You can assign things that it creates subjective value, but it cannot. So me or anyone as an artist, or Clara, for example, as an artist, has a reason for doing all the things that she does in her art the way that she does them, right? Hey, why is the Mona Lisa smiling, right? That's a very important question when you're thinking about this. If an AI makes the Mona Lisa smile, it didn't do it for a reason, and it certainly didn't do it in the context that Da Vinci did it. If you had somebody make a painting that looked like the Mona Lisa with the available art before the Mona Lisa existed, it wouldn't be smiling because none of the other art was smiling, right? That's that's important, and so it's different now because honestly, I would say like 80% of the art that's produced is horseshit because we have a major problem with aesthetics. But the real progress is intentional, right?
So if we take the Mona Lisa as an example, isn't it the Mona Lisa because of Da Vinci versus like the Mona Lisa is Mona Lisa, right?
Yeah, but also I
Like
mean, so
that's
there's
why
some other.
society attributes that value.
No, it's not. So here's the other thing. He came up with this idea of sfuma, I think it's called, which is like a way of doing shading that it's called smoky. It's like fume, right? Sfuma.
But
It's
he was like a military engineer and scientist. Da Vinci
he
was.
did everything.
Yeah,
He
that's
did
what I'm
everything.
saying. That's why
But
it's
whatever.
like so
That's
remarkable.
no, it's not. That's not why. In and of itself, if you just look at it as a painting, it is also a wildly innovative painting. He invented a new style of shading for that, right? Like there's some other things going on, like the level of the horizon in the background, the smile, that are just not things that were done. It's encoded with lots of meaning, right? So it's only something that could have been produced by someone that was an innovator and an amazing talent, right? At that particular place in time because some of the stuff had never been done before, right?
But it's like
So
a
that's
hybrid of science and creativity, right? Like it's not just
I
like there's multiple disciplines at play.
I
right?
would say that any sufficiently complex creative task is a hybrid of multiple disciplines, right? Like, for example, like if I'm designing, which I'm doing right now, I'm working on a series of logos because I'm stuck. um, there's a combination of like symbolism, which I would say that I, I I would probably safely say that I am in the top 1% of people who know about symbols in the world. It's
I'd
not
agree.
something a lot of people know about. Yeah, it's a weird
Niche.
obsession of mine, right? Um, so if we're doing logos and stuff, I would argue that the average person designing logos probably knows more about symbolism than the average person. Um, but combining that with graphic design, combining that with like lighting, which is a totally different thing. You could do flat logos without ever thinking about like the angles of lighting or trying to simulate 3D planes, right? Anything sufficiently good has multiple disciplines in it. Nobody's doing just one thing. Carpentry is also physics, right? Carpentry is also like I don't know what the science of wood is, but like you certainly have to understand like how does wood expand and contract? What is the what are the physics of the wood? But I think that's its own thing. That even beyond physics is like something about like the science of wood. Um, it's also about like aesthetics. So if you just make a structurally sound chair, maybe it's just a three-legged stool. Maybe it has a back, maybe it doesn't, right? But like, is it a Baroque chair? Is it a modernist chair? Is it a cubist chair? Is it like what you know what I mean? Like, is it made of metal? Maybe you're not a carpenter at all. Maybe there's bolts in it, so you have to understand something about metal sciences. There's an engineering component, right? Any sufficiently good creative skill is an intersection of many creative skills or many disciplines,
And
right?
and that's where it's like function and utility comes into play, right?
Yeah, and this is
So
where it's
art,
like,
it's hard to attribute that unless it's like just some
just
crazy cryptic art.
to
Then
some extent. Now, here's the thing: art is also in some ways material science, right? Like, if you could talk to Ocean about this, and I'm sure Clara could speak on this as well. Like, knowing how paint works is fucking complicated, right? You have all these different kinds of paint. They do different things if you mix them. There are like fillers and additives and different things. You like leveling gel, which I didn't even know what that was until Ocean's like, I need to buy leveling gel, right? Um, it's way more complicated than that. And then you're getting into like the science of color, like color theory, and like how do these mix and how do these chemicals interact with each other to do a certain thing, right?
and
Um,
then at the end of the day, it's just canvas and some
yeah, but like,
controllers product.
are you using watercolor? Are you using charcoal? Are you using oil? Are you using acrylic? Are you using something else, right? Are you using like natural pigments? Like, are you using blood? Like, you could use any number of things. And those are all intentional decisions. So that's where it's like with AI, we think it's this amazing thing because some assholes just illegally took all of the stuff that people who actually put their blood, sweat, and tears into shit into, combine that, and then you could just like pull stuff out of it. It's like, yeah, it's cool that it does that, but it's not making the original decisions. It's just like, if I had all of the essays from all the top Harvard essay writers on a single topic, I could probably take my favorite parts out of all of them, make a better essay. But I don't understand how to write essays as a result of that. Maybe unless I like study them and stuff. But the AI isn't capable of studying. It's just a
I'm gonna
program
play
that
devil's
decides.
advocate. I'm gonna play devil's advocate. So like similar to how we were talking about Da Vinci, is like he innovated on painting styles and techniques, and maybe he made his own custom tools for those paintings. Like, couldn't AI be seen as the tool or the car
Yeah,
or
no, I just
the
saw that in the.
hammer?
Yes, that is, in my opinion, that's the correct answer. When
And
people
that's a
treat
more
AI,
optimistic way to like look at it, right? For
well, it's
humanity.
correct. It's the right way. If you treat this is because people are stupid, like at scale, they're even dumber. Um, but if you look at AI as a fucking awesome tool, you're correct. It is an awesome tool. And the way that I would look at it is like, okay, this is what I want personally. I have tried in my years of doing design related things. I've tried 2D, 3D, pixel art, game design, texturing and shading on 3D stuff, and a little tiny bit of animation, right? I don't have the patience to learn all these things. I just don't. I have ideas in my head. I don't have the technical skill. Like if I really, really had the time, I could probably sit down and design a building, but you have to give me a couple years and I have to do a lot of research, right? However, if we had an AI, let's say I can put on an Oculus headset, right, and go into a void. It's like the Matrix void. It's like a gray void, right? And say, all right, give me 8 pillars on either side that are 100 feet apart. They're 150 feet tall. They're 10 feet in diameter, right? And it could just go and pull them up. I could say, okay, now I want these to be ionic pillars, right? Okay, it does some thing. It renders them out. Now they're like marble ionic pillars that are photorealistic and stuff like that. It's like, okay, give me a big marble floor with a diamond cut tile pattern stretching across it. Make every every other tile red and every other tile white, right? Okay, cool. So I could do this. If I had to do this by hand, like with a 3D program or drawing it, it would take me fucking 45 hours and it would be bad, right? But if I could just say, hey, I want these things, I want them spaced like this, and I can adjust the proportions, like, hey, bring the ceiling down 10 feet, space the pillars out 10 feet, right? Okay, and it's just rendering this in real time, and it's just processing out. It's like, okay, give me that pillar, but increase the resolution by like 400%. Okay, then it becomes the Tony Stark thing in Iron Man, where he's just like, right? That is what I think AI is going to be amazing for, because then I could walk in and do logo design, like, hey, give me 7 concentric circles and bifurcate that with like at every 33 degrees with like a diameter line. Then now we're talking about something very cool, right? And I think we're very early to that, but I think 10 years from now, that's a realistic possibility. And that's what I'm interested in seeing. Is I want to be able to talk and have it do things. I don't want to have to sit here and slowly get carpal tunnel as I'm trying to move pixel to pixel things. Like, no, join all of the vertices at the same point and make sure they're aligned on the pixel grid, and make sure all the vertices are 100 pixels away from each other, right? That's much more interesting. And so,
and you still have to understand all the design principles for that to work.
Exactly. And then that's where, like, I would be able to crush architects like that, right? Right now, the architects know how to do the architectural drawing and all the other stuff. But okay, now I plug in like SolidWorks, or I don't know, there's probably some other architectural program that does like load bearing stuff. It's like, okay, give me what's the maximum spacing apart that these pillars can be without the roof collapsing in 10 years, right? And it like can run all the calculations and stress tests and material science shit. It's like, okay, perfect, right? All right, simulate a Category 5 hurricane. Simulate a 9.0 earthquake.
Well,
Cool.
I mean, it's empowering in that sense if you adapt to it. If you like, I agree with you. We don't want the narrative. We feel powerless, but at the same time, you have to acknowledge like it does like make a certain a fairly large swath of like human labor like just directly like nullified, right? So
Yeah, but so did Canva, right? Like Canva eliminated the world's worst graphic designers, right?
right,
Is
right.
Canva
Like,
going to put me out of work? No, it's
no,
not.
like what I was telling Sam the other day is like there's these like AI, like Figma has it, and there's some other ones where like you can basically like build a design and it'll just like give you all the like code for it in whatever like web framework you need. So it helps designers have like more of like, okay, here's the code to wire into the app versus just like, oh, here's a picture to like, you know, that's to write the code for. So like it extends the capabilities of people, like for sure.
Right. It's just the same way that no one writes in binary anymore, right? Doesn't mean we've lost any originality or creativity.
I only speak monkey.
Well, but that's the thing. It's like, here, let's use architecture.
Flip it.
Architecture is the best example. Like almost every building that is built today is god awfully ugly. Almost all of them are atrocious, right? We have an entire field of people who fucking suck at their jobs. An entire field. They're awful, right? I'm literally, from my window, I can see an Advanced Auto Parts, a 7-Eleven, and if I lean really far, there's like a Mexican restaurant over there. And the Mexican restaurant is actually the best looking one because it's got some kind of like period based styling going on. That's cool, right? Even still, it's nowhere near what a building like that would have looked like 100 years ago, which would have been gorgeous, right? Because we had really good people at everything. AI is never going to eliminate the top people in fields. It's going to eliminate the bottom people, which means the average skill level in the field continues to go up, which is cool. And it makes it easier for people to do better and better stuff. Why is Figma better than Illustrator? One of the number one things that makes it better is that the pixel alignment system, or like being able to line stuff up, works 400,000 times better than it does in Illustrator. In Illustrator, it's very hard to align stuff, horribly tedious. It takes, for what I do, where I'm very like pixel perfect about stuff, it takes infinitely more time, right? Okay, cool. That little AI difference of like, how do we detect edges and corners and line them up, which may not even be AI, although there's some kind of like prediction stuff going on in there, saves me infinite time, and I can make more precise, better looking things faster, right? So if we had a similar thing, it was like, okay, well, I'm not good at colors, right? That's not one of my strong suits. So I usually have to go and use a generator, just run through color theory until I can figure it out, right? Okay, give me 15 color palettes based on the colors like, burnt orange, slate gray, and like slightly off white. Okay, cool. Now I could just run out. Here's 10 colors in each set. I like that one. We're going with that. Because I basically do that manually or semi-manually right now by just running through a color generator until I can get the colors I want, right? But I couldn't just pick them if you asked me to pick them. I just know what I'm looking for, and I need to run through options. So I think if you look at it as an ideation tool, it's much more useful for that. It's good at taking, hey, here's the whole scope of all the things that we could possibly be looking at, and then we'll pick one of those and run with it. Like, that's a realistic use case that I think is better. These people are like, yeah, I'm using AI to write my copywriting emails. It's like, then your emails have no content. There's no meaningful content in them, because you're not talking about something unique or original, right?
There
Because it
have
can't
been
generate.
examples of viral ones, but for the most part, yes, I think there is some intuitive sense of like the second that's detected or snuffed out, it's gonna atrophy your brand, right?
Yeah, and it's also that you're just like straight up, if you're talking about something that the AI can talk about consistently, you're not talking about something interesting, right? The AI cannot, I've had somebody put my writing into GPT, and it's like the stuff that came out didn't make any sense, right? It just actually isn't talking about anything meaningful anymore. It sounds a little bit like if I wrote it, but it's like if I wrote it and I was drunk and impaired, right? Like it just doesn't, it's not talking about anything meaningful. So as far as it cannot touch the subjective, only, unless by accident, and certainly not intentionally, right? Whereas people can do that consistently. I can tell you, we could go look at paintings. I could tell you, here's what I think the meanings of these things are. The AI could be trained on a data set of what other people thought the meanings of things are, and it could pull something out of that, but it cannot do that by itself, right? It's only as good as a training set and its ability to extract stuff from the training set, which is still not the level of like original thought that people engage in on a day-to-day basis.
So
Maybe not everyone, but
I actually thought about this, and just to like add a layer of complexity to this, and like the whole like Turing concept of what's real and what's not, and all the whole singularity cybernetic crap. So, anyways, you could like one of the guys that's the director of AI at Tesla, like he has a video and he'll show you how essentially you can, as long as you have someone's text, so like they could extract all of Garrett tweets or all of it Garrett everything, and you could just train an AI on it. So you could basically build like Garrett shadow clones, and it would just be trained on everything you've put in the internet, which is at this point in our generation is probably fairly substantial like data. Like it's probably a decent chunk. And like how would anyone that's not like directly like either interfacing with you like physically or through the camera or some like awareness that like it's you know it's actually you know like I get it, like you could train it, like you can program things, and it's kind of weird because I think if you go in the ancient way, it's like you can like deprogram your mind, in the same like
yeah.
neuroplasticity stuff. So it's like
Last thought on that, and then I got a dip. Here's the thing: if you had this trained robot, could it engage in the conversation that we're engaging with today? No, it can't, because I'm making this shit up on the fly, right? When
well,
it can do
could,
that,
it could,
then we'll talk about it. But
I mean, you could prompt it the same dialogue. So
I guarantee we could do. If you want to train an AI on my writing, I'll happily supply you my writing, and we can see how it plays out. But
We should have an AI
dude,
session.
I'll do it, dude. I'll do it.
All right, man. Next time.
All right.
All right. Thanks for coming out, everybody. Good talk.
All right, man. Yeah, that'd be cool. All right, dude.
Y'all.
Take care. All right, we'll wrap it up for today. but that would be awesome to have basically a debate between Garrett and ChatGPT. Oh man, the camera's all messed up now. Everybody stop their video. There we go.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries. It's all right. All right. Well, that's all for today, guys. Thanks for watching and joining us in Discord. If you're not in Discord yet, go to triba.community and hop in. It's free to join, and you can participate in co-working as well as share your designs, your website, your business, and just get plugged into a community that cares about you. And in Triba, you're heard. So you get a voice, and you can be part of something really awesome as we move into a more Web3 space. So a lot of this stuff they're talking about, we get to try it out and demo it. We have AI bots in our different channels. There's a movie generating AI that you give it a movie that you like, and it'll give you back a recommendation. Michelangelo built that one. It's pretty cool. And then we have Midjourney, so you can try out the image generation one in our AI art channel. Lots of really cool stuff to do, as well as a whole bunch of business topic channels to discuss relevant things like marketing, investing, cybersecurity, and we got sales. I'm not going to go through all of them. There's a lot, but you should check them out. Go to triba.community and sign up for gold if you want to help support the community. And we look forward to our next stream. Tomorrow we're going to be doing marketing updates and news. So we'll talk about social media, what's going on in that world, and follow up on Twitter and the things that have been happening with Facebook Verified. That's all, and we'll catch you next time, guys.